Services in Windows are really powerful tools for automation, but they're often overlooked. These small applications run constantly in the background and can be used for a number of tasks from the simple to the complex. In this video, we're going to look at how to create service, how to run it and debug it, and how to install it. Now, if you're new to this channel, my name is Tim Corey, and it's my goal to make learning C# easier. Whether you're new to C# or have used it for years, you should be able to find something here that will benefit you. One of the biggest ways you can see improvement in your C# skills is through practice. Make sure that whatever you learn, you practice. That's why I have an ongoing series on Thursdays called the Weekly Challenge. I encourage you to participate each week to make sure your skills stay sharp. Okay, let's get started. Now I'm going to start from a blank project today. If you want the final source code, there's a link in the description that will take you to a blog post where you can download this code. For this video, we're going to create a console application. So File, New Project. We'll start the console application. I'm going to create this and call it the Simple Heartbeat Service. Okay, because really the idea here is not about what code I put in here, but instead on how to create the service itself. Now, I will go over a few different ways that these can be used to kind of get you jump started in using this in the real world. But for this, we're just going to create a simple heartbeat service that will say, yes, I'm alive, over and over. Now, before we get started, I do want to make sure I clarify what a service is, because there's a few different things that are called services. But in this case, what we're talking about is a Windows service. So if you go to if you hit the Windows key and just type service, this is what you get, a list of services. And these are things that run in the background on your computer. Notice that there's some that are running and some that are not. So here's the list of ones that I have running. And there's a lot of them. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Some people kind of freak out and see all the things running in the background. It's only a problem if they're really heavy and take up a lot of resources. But a lot of services just kind of sit there in the background and do things occasionally. And that's what we're going to create today. Something that does something occasionally. It's not heavy. It's not going to slow your computer down significantly in any way. So, but for example, let's just pull a few here. Hyper-V. So Hyper-V is a virtual machine management system that runs in Windows. And I have that installed and it's running. So I can run virtual machines if I want to. And there's a whole bunch more in here. MySQL on port 80 is running. Or MySQL 80, I'm not sure it's port 80. But there's a whole bunch in here. SQL is here. Remote desktop is here, and so forth. So that's the services list. We're going to add our own called Simple Heartbeat Service. So just to make sure, let's come down here and look for SI. And there's SH and then SM. So there's no Simple Heartbeat Service listed here. So just kind of keep that in mind because eventually we're going to put a service there. So we have a command or a console application. Now you may have thought that we'd do this instead. Let me just kind of point this out. There's a project type. If you search for service, you'll probably find, well, WCF service, that's something totally different, but then there's Windows service right here. We could have used that project type. The problem with this project type is it's very hard to debug. And so instead of doing that, we're going to use a console application, which is going to do the same exact thing as that service project type, only we can also run it as a console application. And the benefit there is we can run it locally and debug it, or we can install it as a service. And we don't have to attach to that service in order to debug it then, and then redeploy it every time. And that's kind of the problem with the built-in service type project is that in order to debug it, you have to install it, get it to run your machine, and then attach the debugger to that running application to debug it. And I find that when I'm initially creating an application, that debugging process is a lot of back and forth. And so if I make one fix and think that's the whole fix, and then I deploy it again and it's not the whole fix and I do it again and again and again, that's a long process. This makes it shorter by using it as a console application. Now I could do this manually and just create the whole thing manually and install it with a command line and all the rest. But I'm going to make my life a little easier and use a tool. And the tool is open source. It's been around for a long time, and it will be around for a long time. And that is Topshelf. So right-click on References, go to Manage NuGet Packages, and we're going to search for Topshelf. This first one right here, 3.45 million downloads, so it is very popular. It has been used a lot, obviously, but it also has a lot of integrations. For example, Squirrel Updater. So we talked about the Squirrel desktop installer application before. Well, this will allow you to do updates using Squirrel to your service. But we're just going to use just Topshelf for today, and we'll hit install. All right, and we're done. Now, the first thing I want to do is I actually want to create my service code. Now, service code's a little bit different than a console application. A console application has a start and end, and it kind of just flows linearly. So you start at the beginning of this curly brace, and by the time you get to the end, you're done. And that's not really what a service does. It continues to run in the background forever, potentially. And so we're going to have to create something to do that. And it's a really simple little, kind of like a template or formula you do. So let's create a class, and this class is going to be the class where it's actually doing the service work. So we're going to call this the heartbeat. Let's call it heartbeat. Make it public. And in here, we have to have a few things. First of all, we need to have a start method and a stop method, both public. And that start will get called when we're starting our service. And the stop will get called when we stop our service. So let's set that up. But first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up what this is going to do. In this case, really simple stuff. I'm going to have a timer run. And it's going to run every second. And when the timer elapses, I'm going to write to a file just the date and time. Simple. Okay. So private read only timer. Now I hit Control dot to add a using statement. But there's two different kinds of timers. So we have system.threading and system.timers. These two are similar in nature, and in fact, they will work the same way if you have a simple application. But if you get into a multi-thread situation, what you really want is not the threading one, but the timers one. The timers one is actually thread safe. So let's use the system.timers. And we'll call this _timer. And now what we'll do is create a constructor, CTOR, and we'll say that the timer equals new timer, and we'll give it a 1 second interval. So it counts in milliseconds. So 1000 is 1 second. I also want to set the auto reset to true. And what that does is says, okay, when you've elapsed your time, I want you to start over. So it's going to go 1 second and then do it again and again and again. And I want to create an event for this. So when the time has elapsed, and I'll hit tab to create that event. I'll close this out. Now it does create the name is _timer _ elapsed. I don't like that. Let's just call it timer elapsed like so. And there we go. So now we have the timer elapsed event. I might want to even make this a little better. So just call it timer elapsed like so. And now it looks a little more like a normal method. Now events typically do have the lowercase because they're attached to a type like timer, but I think this looks a little cleaner. So we're going to do it. Okay. The throw new not implemented exception. Since I created that automatically, what this does is it creates a new not implemented exception inside my code because it's saying, I created this code for you, but I don't want you calling this thinking it's all done. So if you ever actually call this, it's going to throw an exception, which is what you want until you put real code in here. But when we're ready to put real code in here, we can get rid of the exception. Now in here, I have a couple different things I can do, but I am going to use the file append all lines method. So let's create some just one line, but I'll create an array. Equals new string array. And I'm going to have one line in here, which is datetime.now.toString. Like so. And so even though this is not in quotes, this is one string add to the string array. And I can use this string array now to say file, which I do control dot, and add the using system.io. So file.append all lines. We have to give it a path, which I'm going to hard code. In a real world situation, you'd probably want to put this into a config file. But ctemp, we'll put it in the demos folder. We're going to create a file here called heartbeat.txt. So we're going to append all lines, which we only have one line, but that's okay. And I did this because if I ever wanted to add a second line, it's just easier to add it to that array than it is to do the append all text, which I have to add the new line at the end and make sure I do that every time, and just ignore that. I want to do it this way, it's easier. So what this will do is it'll append the string datetime.now to the end of the text file. Now, if a text file does not exist, this append all lines will create it. Now, the path does have to exist, so make sure that path is valid for your application if you're going to run this yourself. So all it's going to do every time we hit 1 second, it's going to run this event method, which creates that one line and writes it to the heartbeat text file at the end. So we'll just see the date time every time increase by 1 second, essentially. So that's the timer, and that's the constructor that sets the timer up, but it hasn't started the timer yet. And that's where we get into our public void start, which just says timer.start. We're going to do the same thing for public void stop. Timer.stop. So now we have our constructor, which sets up a timer. Then we have a start method, which starts the timer, and a stop method, which stops the timer. So if the service is started, then that timer is going to keep ticking 1 second, 1 second, 1 second, and keep writing to that text file. When the service is stopped, the timer stops. It doesn't write to the text file anymore. So that's basically our complete service. Now, for you might want to do something different in here. And we'll talk about that in a minute, about what you could do in here to maybe do something different with your service. But probably a structure will be pretty much the same. Usually use a timer. The timer allows you to dial in how much does this service run. So in my case, it runs every second. But the reality is for a lot of services, it could run every minute or every 10 minutes or every hour even. So next we have to do is we actually have to wire this up to be called. We have this class, but we're not actually calling it anywhere yet. And that's where Topshelf comes in. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by saying var exit code equals host factory. Do a control dot there to bring in Topshelf. So using Topshelf right here. So factory dot run. This is where it's actually going to run our service, and we'll say that it's going to say X, and our arrow function or our equals greater than, whichever you want to call it. And I put our semicolon at the end before we go in here and put code. And this sets up the service. This is Topshelf specific code. They do have great documentation on their website, and I'll link to that in the description. I'm really following their pattern pretty much, because it's pretty basic. Because all you want this to do is just wire stuff up. So x.service, and the service is going to be heartbeat. That's the service we want to call. And using that, we'll say s for service, and the arrow function again. I can't use x because I'm already inside of this one, which uses X. So S for service. S.construct using, and we'll say heartbeat, arrow function, new heartbeat. And that calls a constructor for the heartbeat service. And then when started, we need to say, and I can use the same heartbeat, not capital H, lowercase h. And we'll say that arrow function heartbeat dot start. And what this is doing is just saying, okay, when you want to start, call the start method on the heartbeat class. It will do the same thing again, but instead of when started, it's going to be when stopped. And we're going to call the stop method. So call start when started, call stop when stopped. And the constructor to use is the empty constructor. So that sets the service up, but we're not quite done yet because we want to say, well, how do you want this service to run? Now a service, let me just bring my services back over and let's open up a service. It doesn't really matter which one. Notice here there's a startup type. We'll get to that in a minute, but there's also who you log in as. Local system account or a specific account, and there's other accounts as well you can use. So there's different options services can run under. And what those different options do is they give you different permission levels. And I won't go into all the things services can do as far as which permission levels do what. I'll just do the simplest one, which is run as, and you have your options here, a network service, a local system, a local service. We're going to choose local system. And that should give us all the permissions we need. Now, the last thing I want to do for this service is I want to set up the basic information. And again, let's bring the services back in. We have our name, notice sensor space service. Well, that's the friendly name for this because this service is actually called sensor service no space. We can read that. And then it's got this description here as well, which is a whole long description that tells you what this service does. We want the same thing for our service. So let's set up x.setServiceName, and this is the no space name. Okay, this is the machine-friendly name. Okay, so no spaces. So I'll say heartbeat service. Now we can set the display name. This is what we tell the users the name is. Notice I'm using the space in there. And now we can set the description. The description is something much larger that describes what we do. So this is the sample heartbeat service used in a YouTube demo. Let's make sure we get the semicolon at the end. So now we have all of this set up, but notice I'm capturing the output of host factory.run. Notice it says Topshelf exit code, and I'm grabbing that as exit code. This will continue to run as long as the service is running. But once it stops, it's going to grab this exit code. And so I want to capture that and convert it into an int. So int exit code value equals, we need to cast to an int this value, convert dot change type, and this is the exit code dot get type code. So what this does is exit code is an enum. It's going to convert it over to an integer, which we then capture in our exit code value. And now when we say environment dot exit code equals exit code value, that's that integer. And the reason why is because exit code needs an integer, and so they have mapped all the different type of exit codes to an enum to make it easy, but then we have to map it back to an int in order to return that to the environment.exit code. So yes, that's a lot of saying exit code. And it might be a little confusing looking at these two lines, but essentially all it's doing is converting it from a enum to an int and passing it out. And if you have to, you can copy and paste these lines and they'll work every time as long as you make sure these names are consistent. And if you want to change something, like you call this something else, I think that Topshelf call it something else, HR or something like that. Well, you just rename this HR and then rename these two things as well to be HR and you're good to go. So if it's a little confusing, I understand, but the reality is you just need to know how to convert from an enum back to an int. Okay, guess what? We're done. We've got our service ready to go. Now let's test this out by running it as just a console application. So I'm going to hit start here. And notice it says, okay, success, name, display name, description, service. And it says it's now running. Press Control-C to exit. And if I bring over my demos folder, notice I have in C temp demos a heartbeat file. There was not there before. Let's open that up with Notepad++. And Notepad++ has a fun feature. Under the View menu, it says Monitoring. And what it'll do is refresh this every time the file changes. And notice it keeps incrementing the value because we keep writing to this text file every second. So it's working the way we intended it to. Now, let's go ahead and hit Control-C here. And notice it stopped. 42 seconds was the last time we wrote to that file. Let's close that down, turn off monitoring first, and we're going to close this down. And now what we're going to do is we're going to install this service. So back over here, just remember that there is no service called Heartbeat. We called it Heartbeat service. So G to HO. So there's no Heartbeat service. So I think I was going to call it something else before. But anyways, simple Heartbeat service. That's what I was thinking about. We're just going to call it Heartbeat service. So that's the difference. But group policy client to host guardian client service. So there's no heartbeat in the middle. Let's go ahead and change that. If we right click here and say open folder in File Explorer, that's going to open up our project file. Inside the bin debug, there is the heartbeat service.exe. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab everything here. I don't need a PDB file, but I'm going to grab it anyways. It's fine for what I need to do. I'm going to come over to my folder here in the demos. I'll create a new folder for heartbeat service. And in here, paste that exe. Now, this is not the squirrel-like deployment we'd like. And so, yes, you'd want to do a more actual deployment. But this is the simplest way of doing it. Okay, this is really simple. I'm going to show you a simple way. You can go on and figure out how to do the further deployment with Squirrel, or I can show you in a later video. But for this video, you can just put this on a thumb drive and put it into a folder you want to keep. And the key here is this folder, you can't delete it later because this is where the service is actually going to run from. So I've chosen this location right here for a simple heartbeat service.exe. I copy that path. I'm going to open up a command prompt, and let's just say run. I'm going to do it from my run as menu. And the screen flashed there for minutes because I did the administrative command prompt. So administrative command prompt gives me all the access I need to install this. So I'm going to say cd and paste in that path to change directory to that location. Now it's called simple heartbeat service.exe. So to install this, what I need to do is say simple heartbeat service.exe install, and the last command I'm going to do is say start. So what that'll do is it'll install this service, and it's going to start it too. So let's run that. And it says, you're good to go. The heartbeat service was started, it was installed. And in fact, if we come back over here and we open this back up with Notepad and we turn back on the monitoring, you'll notice that the date and times are updating automatically. And that's because the service is running. Now, I just move this out of the way. I could close this because it's already done. Notice it's back at the command prompt. You don't have to keep this window open. But I'm going to just because of the fact I need to get back here to make some other commands. But to show you that it's installed, let's refresh this list. And now heartbeat service is listed here. The description is correct. This is a sample heartbeat service used in a YouTube demo. And it says heartbeat space service. And it's currently running. Now I could stop this. And now it's stopped. And if you look over here, in fact, it's no longer refreshing. So that's a service in a nutshell. It's very easy to install. And actually, it's also very easy to uninstall. And that's another key feature here. And that's the reason I kept this open. So if I want to uninstall this, instead of saying simple heartbeat service install, I just want to say uninstall. It's saying it's already successful for removing it from the system. It's still wrapping up a couple things. Now it's completed and we're done. So now to come back over here and refresh, the heartbeat service is no longer there. Really simple to do. So what we learned? We learned it's really easy to install a service. It's really easy to create a service. And it's really easy to do things with a service. Now, obviously writing to a text file, not the best use of a service, especially since you probably blow it up at some point because it's just going to get too big. But there are other things we can do, and let's talk through some of the other things we could do. One of the things you could do is you could have a folder cleanup routine. So for example, I use my downloads folder a lot. I keep a lot of junk in there. I just forget to clean it up because I download something and then I just need to get it cleaned out because I'm going to do something with that file if I really wanted it. Otherwise, it just kind of sits there. And so you could actually have a service run probably every hour even, and just delete everything in the downloads folder. Just wipe it all out. And maybe you only delete things that are older than a certain time. That way you're not going to delete a currently downloading thing. But you could delete everything that's old out maybe even once a day if you wanted to. But do it automatically, not something you have to think about, oh, I need to run that process. So a little service. Another one is I have a ton of pictures. I take pictures all the time. And if I could have some little tool that just organized those pictures into maybe a folder by month, by year. So a year folder, then a month folder, and maybe even a day folder. And then it would just sort them into the right spots. Well, I could do that using a tool where I just dump all my photos into one file or one folder. And then this tool would say, oh, there's new folder or new files here. I'm going to take every picture file, not anything else, just the picture files, and sort them based upon the date they were created. If you're working for a company or you're working with some system where you're getting a CSV file, you could have that CSV file automatically processed. Just create a little folder on your desktop or somewhere that the service watches. And you dump a CSV file in there, it opens it up, it reads it through, it parses it out, and it puts it into a database. And it's all just automatic. There's no thought about this running process. So then the next thing you could do is have that folder be in your OneDrive and share that out with clients or other people. And they could put the CSV files in there. And then when OneDrive downloads those CSV files, it processes them. So on the kind of the reverse of it, it could watch a database. And every time it checks, and maybe it's going to check once a minute or so, if there's new records in a table, then it could process those records. For example, it could email customers and then move them out of this table. Or, an idea is a help desk. So a new person submits a help desk request, it goes in the database, and then this system watches that, and as soon as it sees a new record, it emails that person back and says, your help ticket has been submitted. We've got it assigned, and here's the information. Here's the the ID or whatever it is that we've assigned to it. So there's a lot of things you could do on an automatic basis that a service would be great for. So there's a lot of power here. There's a lot of stuff you could do. Just be careful, because the other side of it is, since there is so much power here, there's also so much possibility that you could do something harmful. For example, don't leave this service running forever, because it will blow that text file up. It'll be gigabytes in size in no time. And all of a sudden, you're clogging your computer up, you have no space, and this file is too big to even open in Notepad. So don't do that one. But there's a lot of things you can do that are positive with this program. Let me know what you think of that you might want to do in your application. Just leave in the comments below. Maybe it'll spark somebody else's creativity with what they want to do as well. All right? Also, if you have any questions or thoughts about this, leave them in the comments below. I'll try to get to them as soon as possible. Thanks for watching. I hope you have a great day. And as always, I am Tim Corey.